I I love the fact that you're a U Miami grad and that you're like, yes, okay, so there we go, right? So I went to UConn, right? So we went head to head in the last Final Four, and that was like a big game. In fact, many people felt like that was the national championship game, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm a little older than you, so I was at UConn when we were Big East rivals. So it was before Miami had gone to the ACC, right? And so those were the days of like the really like rough, like these were rough and tumble rivals. Like people would get hurt. It was crazy.
Oh my
I don't mean
God.
spectators, I mean athletes themselves, right? So you and I can like either be like like I like that you did that and all, but like we may have some contention throughout this conversation. I just want to put it out there.
Listen, I'm used to it. Everyone that loves to hate the U, and you know what? I'm always here for it. So whether it's basketball, baseball, football,
Football. Yeah.
come for us then. It's
That's
all
That's all good. But hey, look, we had a heck of a game between UConn men's basketball and U Miami men's basketball in the last March Madness. So we'll always have that and we can always share in that. But so fun. I'm so excited to chat with you today. I know we had to go back and forth to get this scheduled, and I'm so happy that we did get it scheduled. And I think the most interesting thing about you and your story, and I want to get into all of that, is I don't speak to many individuals who make this transition from being, quite frankly, an award-winning journalist to being an entrepreneur, to starting your own sort of content marketing agency. I think you're going to hash mark the first ever person I've talked to who's gone from TV personality to entrepreneur. Um, and you probably get this question a lot, Tamika, but just by way of sort of introducing yourself, just a little bit about your yourself, and then your role, your career as a journalist, and then I'd love to kind of then take that into what you've done as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for asking. I'm so
Yeah,
glad that we could, link up and do this
yeah,
today. So, I guess, when I think about my background, and what I wanted to be growing up, it was either like a storyteller, journalist, a vet, like so many, and then
yeah,
a detective. So,
yes,
once I realized in order to be a detective and investigate things and crimes, I needed to start at the bottom and work patrol. I was like, that's not going to be for me. Much respect to those who do take that path, but that wasn't going to be mine. So I'm like,
yeah,
how can I uncover and investigate and tell stories? And I felt like journalism was another way to do that because I
right.
also always loved writing. Like I'm a big writer.
Oh, that's cool. That's really
At
cool. Yeah, I was saying before we went live, I was like, are there some fun things I want to ask you about? And one of them was like, how do you like you wanted to be a detective, and clearly you just kind of said like your investigative nature, I'm sure, led you into journalism, but like was that like a childhood thing, or was that something that kind of came because like little children have like really cool fantasy, like I knew the things I wanted to be growing up, which was like rock star, all that fun stuff, right? So was it like a kid thing, or did that come through as an adult?
It was definitely a kid thing. I
Yeah.
did want to be a pop star as
Yeah,
well.
well, I think we all go through that phase, right? Yeah.
I think I still kind of do.
Nothing wrong with that.
But no, I definitely like the books that I read as a kid, what
Yeah.
like the Nancy Drew, like anything mystery.
Love it.
I even liked more adult shows as a
Right.
kid. So I was usually watching like you know, what is it? Dateline Investigates
Yeah,
2020.
like yeah, a lot of those like yeah, a lot of investigative journalism type pieces. Yeah.
Exactly. So
Mhm.
I enjoyed that as a kid. I mean, even when I started writing, I think one of the very first things I wrote was like a murder mystery as like when I was in elementary school. I'm like, I'm gonna write my own investigative story. And it
I
was
love
like
it.
me as the detective uncovering, what happened in this crime. So I don't know. That's just always been something I've been interested in.
That's so cool.
And
That's so cool. But the very first thing I ever wrote as a child, my mom still has it. It was about a spider that took a walk. and like his adventure and his walk. And I think he might have gotten murdered actually during the walk. I'll have to go back and read the story. So maybe you and I should combine into those together on that. It would be fun, right? Oh my gosh. Oh my God. So it can't have been a coincidental transition that I would assume, right? From what you're telling me about your background as an investigator, as a journalist, as a writer, as someone who was always interested in storytelling, right?
Right.
You made this sort of transition into what is now, content media marketing. I'll let you describe it so I don't do it a misjustice. But it was a side hustle. It became something more than a side hustle. Talk a little bit about the birth of TB Media.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Journalism, and at the time that I got in 2010 professionally, that was when I graduated college. You
Mm-hmm.
still had to kind of do the small market
Yeah.
thing. And for me, I went to Montgomery, Alabama. But luckily, after 2 years there, I had an opportunity to come back to South Florida, to the Miami Fort Lauderdale market. But I will say, if you want to do more specials or more investigative work, more long form, what we call it in the traditional TV world,
Mm-hmm.
those types of things are fewer and further between at that time, and even more so now because of budget cuts, because of even more news time to
Yeah.
fill.
Yeah.
So what
24-hour
happens?
hour cycle, right?
24-hour
Yeah.
cycles, which means you can't commit your journalists or certain, videographers, photographers, reporters that you have on staff to say, hey, go work on this investigative piece that may take you a year or two
Right.
years.
To do it justice. Yeah.
Exactly.
Mm.
So it's like, hey, I've got hours and minutes to fill now. So I realized, and it could be the impatience in me,
Right.
that through being a journalist, that, hey, most of my time was going to be committed to the day in, day out, local news type of
Mm-hmm.
grind. Or I shouldn't even say local news. There was an opportunity,
To do
certainly, to
national.
grow.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But still, it's still a different path to get
Yeah.
to where you're working on more special projects or
Sure.
features.
Yeah.
So I said, hey, how can I? And then at that time, let's say around 2014 is when I said, hey, I want to leave the traditional news business. What's
Mm-hmm.
happening? Social media and the
Yeah.
way that
Exploding. Yeah.
exploding at this time. We had it, but it wasn't really like businesses and brands were really leveraging it.
Right.
So this
Right.
is really starting to change the way that organizations are communicating with their audiences and now can really bypass traditional media.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
So that was really what inspired me to leave traditional media and actually go more onto the brand side. So I went into nonprofit arts because I still wanted to tell stories,
Oh, very exciting. Yeah.
but I wanted to work in the nonprofit space, and arts has always been a passion of mine. So I started doing that in-house for a
Mm.
couple of different arts organizations until 2018. I got laid off from one of my roles, and
Gotcha.
that was really what
The big, yeah.
that was really exactly what spawned the creation of TV Media Group.
And you could have, I mean, but at that point, I mean, you clearly had started to make a name for yourself as a journalist in either local markets, mid market, large market, whatever. So you could have tried to find another role, right? And I know you kind of aforementioned some of the challenges that kept you well, at least started getting you thinking about something new, right? But gosh, it's a side hustle, TB Media, that becomes this full-fledged agency, right? You've got multiple team members. I don't want to again speak for you, but I know you've got dozens and dozens of clients in a very short period of time. Um, what do you attribute that to, I guess, Tamika?
A lot of sleepless nights.
Yeah. So you're still up 24 hours a day.
Well, yeah, that hasn't totally escaped me just yet. But
Yeah.
um, I will say it's definitely been a strong network, specifically in South Florida, and just
Mm.
through companies that I've had relationships with, and being a good relationship builder and
Yeah.
continuing to nurture those relationships, I think has been beneficial. And then also just being really kind of scrappy and
Yeah.
flexible and agile as I go. I've learned that, hey, as problems arise or situations arise, to kind of, how can I solve this problem instead of it really letting it get me down. So I think
Sure.
there's always, the growth has been because I haven't given up.
Right, right. You've kept with the grind, if you will, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
And I was loving like your social media the other day. You were like all at a boardroom table as a team, and you were like locking in for the year and all this stuff. It was like really cool. I was like, this is inspiring, you know? It's
Thank
it's
you.
it's it's really cool. Um, it is such a big overwhelming life decision though, right? And a lot of the young women that listen to this show are maybe at a precipice point, Tamika, where they're trying to understand if this is the right choice for them, right? And anybody can kind of, you mentioned social media, can kind of position themselves on social media as an entrepreneur, right? But not give a lot of context as to really what that means. But I do believe the folks that are listening to this are not just hanging the word entrepreneur out there and they really mean it, right? And they have something genuine that they want to drive forward, but maybe just haven't figured out how to do it or when to do it or are scared to do it.
Yeah.
I'm sure you must have faced those similar. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah. So can you elaborate maybe just a little bit on maybe one single realization point that you had that made you decide that this is what I'm going to focus on, or maybe it was the culmination of many points. I would love to hear what was that moment for you, if there was such a moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be hard to say that there's, hey, this one moment where I knew this is the right direction, because there's so many pivots and twists and turns.
Sure.
And even when I was side hustling, let's say for about a year and a half before I got laid off,
Mm-hmm.
when I got laid off, I was interviewing. I was interviewing for other roles, and
Mm.
by it's just the way things turned out, those a few of those didn't. I got one offer and it was actually rescinded.
Wow.
I was one of two finalists for another role and I didn't get it. There
Yeah.
was another, like, there were just
And you're
all
like,
of the,
what else do I have to do here? Like, what is
yes. So I hadn't, my mind wasn't fully fixed on this is the direction I'm going to go. So if you're feeling that way, I think the only thing that I can really say is you don't know until you try.
Yeah.
And we don't have to make a decision and say, hey, that's it, I'm done, I'm locked in forever. So I think sometimes, especially as like high achievers or perfectionists, we can tend to want to lock ourselves into something and say,
Yes.
I'm making a decision and this is it, this is the direction, and that's what I'm committing to.
I'm staying this course. I'm going to succeed on this course, right? Yep.
Exactly. But
Yep.
it doesn't happen that way. So I said, after all of those other kind of opportunities didn't seem to pan out, I said, you know what? Hey, I've been on this path. Let me give this 6 months to a year and see if I can feed myself. And if I'm having fun and still liking doing it, then I'll continue. And if
Yeah.
not, then I can, go search for another opportunity. So I'd say take that pressure off of yourself to feel like you have to know this is the right thing, because
Yeah.
it could be the right thing right now, but then in a year, 5 years, or even 10 years, it might not be the right thing for you at that point.
What I
So
find so fascinating, and you just said this, Tamika, with like the notion of like, we're entrepreneurs, we're type A, we're driven, we want to succeed, because that's like a really important ingredient to entrepreneurship is being driven and having this passion for success and wanting to go after and solve the hard problems that nobody else wanted to solve, right? But you also, it's like the left brain, right brain thing. You also need to have all this creativity, and you need to have you have to be able to be willing to pivot and be rational and sometimes irrational. And it's like this, it's such a unicorn. And I guess that's maybe why they call them unicorns, but it is such a unicorn world to live in. um I find it so fascinating when folks, and I've done the entrepreneurship thing myself, but I find it so fascinating when folks like yourself really just go in and make that decision.
I'm glad you brought up
Yeah.
that point, because that
Yeah.
was another thing that I was going to mention.
Yeah.
Is you are going to make a pivot or you want to go on this path. I'd say spend some time really learning yourself and knowing what your strengths are.
Mm.
I think that's been really helpful for me in knowing, hey, what is it that I do really well? Like, are you a visionary, but are you less strong when it comes to actually executing?
Yeah.
Or are you an executor and you need some more help with strategic thinking? Like, understand that about yourself so you know who you need to lean on, or, who you need to kind of pull into your team, or,
Yeah.
advisor or a mentor to help guide you along along that path, so that you can really start to grow and not get frustrated, right?
Right.
Because if executing is just not your thing, it's probably never going to be your
Right,
thing.
right. No, it's very true. And have your posse, right? And the people that you can rely on, whether they be mentors, advisors, maybe it's, a sibling, maybe it's a parent, maybe it's it's all these different people. And I really appreciate what you say about like knowing the things where you have your limitations and being humble about those things and being self-aware of those things so you can focus on your strength areas and
Yeah,
not, and get the help you need in the areas that aren't your strength areas. Right. Yeah.
exactly,
So,
exactly.
Tamika, you've had some I was reading, your background obviously before our call, and you've had some pretty interesting personal, you know, trials and tribulations that you've gone through. And I'm sure that has really helped to shape your path as an entrepreneur, your path as a person. Of course, this is a show about women entrepreneurs, so I really want to talk as well about, um, I will never know what it's like to be a woman entrepreneur, right? But I certainly really enjoy talking to them. I So would you tell us a little bit about some of your personal journey and some of the things that kind of continue to shape where you're going and as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Is there any one thing you were thinking of in
Well,
particular?
you talked a little bit about some, like, some of the challenges you face. Like you talked about, like, some of your health struggles on your in your bio. You talked about some of the loss you've experienced in your bio. And again, I don't want to go anywhere you don't want to go to, but I do think that, look, everybody goes through struggles. And I think sometimes people think like, well, I can only be an entrepreneur, or I can only do this thing when everything is perfect, and nothing is ever going to be perfect. The circumstances are never going to be perfect, right? For you to do anything.
Right.
So I do, yeah, I think it would be uh, hard at any given time, but you faced a lot of struggles too as you were going through this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Especially when I first really started and decided to say, hey, I'm going to take this thing full time. I had just come off of a really difficult year with like the loss of an unexpected loss of a loved one, my cousin who was only 8 years old at the
Yeah.
time.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, and, that was obviously a traumatic experience. And going through an extended layoff essentially, which felt a little bit abusive in the
Sure.
workplace,
Yeah.
for 9 months of, will you have a job? Will you not have a job? Will you have,
Right.
like, it was very it was a very difficult and
Yeah.
unfortunate.
I can imagine it must have been very, very tumultuous for you. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Instead of just saying, I would have rather like rip the band-aid off and say, hey, you're no longer going to be here.
Right.
And the loss of an important relationship in my life. There was a lot all at once that
Yeah.
I talk about the health challenges that I had. When I look back at it now, which a lot of it that I wrote about at the time too, and starting the podcast, I didn't realize how much it was like all of this stress
Mm.
manifested into creating these autoimmune symptoms, which I also believe was like, hey, food and exercise, just all of those physical things that we can control, but then
Right.
also the stress that I just feel like I've never been great about managing. And it showed up in physical ways.
Yeah. It's
So
all started all manifesting for you that way. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And being someone who I would say is definitely a bit of a control freak when things start
Yeah.
going out of
Spiraling.
control,
Yeah.
it can make you feel out of control. And I think that's what happened for
Mm.
me. And I think we're going through this entrepreneurial journey full time for the last 5 years now,
Yeah.
has really made me realize, hey, there's so much that I cannot control.
Right.
And has actually allowed me, I'm still a control freak, but it still has allowed me to let go a little bit more and just, breathe easier when things
Sure.
don't necessarily go my way. So I think I am more flexible in a lot
Yeah.
of ways because I realize how that can have such a detrimental effect on our health if we don't,
Yeah.
um, take a moment to just figure out how to manage the stress.
I think of the quote, but still she persisted, right? And I feel so much of that energy coming off of you right now as you tell that story, like, but still she persisted, but still she persisted. So that is remarkable, Tamika. It's absolutely remarkable. And I'm sure it didn't feel that way when it was happening to you at all. Yeah. Yeah. Not at all.
No,
Yeah.
absolutely not. Absolutely not. But we have to do that. We have to do,
Right.
and thank you for saying that. We have to do that. We have to pat ourselves on the back and
Mm.
say, wow. And, I saw so many people sharing because it felt like 2023 was a difficult year for a lot of people. I
Yeah,
saw
for sure.
so many people sharing at the end of the year, if like, hey, if you didn't accomplish X, Y, Z, all these things, that's okay. If all you did was just survive.
Right, right. Then
Sometimes you have to
give
just celebrate.
yourself give yourself a bell for that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Tamika, you mentioned the Lift You Up podcast a minute ago. Tell us a little bit about what you're trying to accomplish with your medium there.
Yeah. There were a couple of things and a couple of different reasons I wanted to start the podcast, which I actually launched a month after
Mm.
we went into full on shutdown with the pandemic.
Sure,
So
sure.
this was April of 2020, although I had been planning it prior to that. And I think there's a couple of reasons. So our values are health, happiness, human connection.
Mm.
Um, and because those are just things we believe that all of us require
Right.
in life. Um, and so I wanted to be able to tell those types of stories and create a podcast that was the intersection of storytelling, health stories, happy stories, and stories of inspiration.
Mm.
But people who have gone through their own challenges, struggles, life lessons, and have turned that into a business, a health solution, a happiness solution, whatever that is, to help other people live healthy and happy lives. And so there were a couple of reasons. One, because I wanted to create and I wanted to have a creative outlet for myself outside of just, hey, this is what we are creating for our clients.
Right.
I wanted a business development tool, right? A
Mm.
podcast is a great way
Yeah, great. Yeah.
new people and built new relationships and and also that was a great SEO tool in addition for us as well to be
Yeah,
adding
to have people to get people to
content.
find you. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Exactly. So those were really the three reasons that I started it. We've been a little bit on a pause since last year as we've kind of been thinking, hey, as
Yeah.
the heavy lift that can come along
Yeah.
with it. But just kind of thinking about, hey, what are the most important conversations that we need to have and where do we need to spend our time? But it's, let's see, over 120 or 130 or so episodes. And we've had a really great time producing that podcast and met so many people that have
Yeah.
really inspired us.
I can empathize again. You and I are walking a little bit of a similar path there where, we're, I don't know, 70 episodes in at this point. And the show, of course, has navigated a very different, not the path I would have expected it to navigate over the last 70 episodes. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Because the guests are navigating. I'm just sitting here. Right. That's why the show has moved in this pattern of, not non-linear pattern because of the guests like yourself that you're really kind of navigating the direction and where it goes, so that's pretty exciting. I do want to talk a couple minutes again we about as a female entrepreneur and you're in a space that is dominated by very large media conglomerates. You're competing against other content companies and digital media, digital marketing firms. Talk to me about, just as a woman entrepreneur, some of the challenges you face there, because these are the important things we want to get out there so people understand them.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you asked this. And
Yeah.
what's so funny is that this morning, before we got on this call, I was working on actually writing some of our content for social media. And when you end up on a rabbit hole, like
Yeah.
researching data and statistics, and
Happens to me all the time.
4 hours later, I'm here like
Yeah.
still reading articles. I'm like, oh my gosh, what happens to the day? But I came across just so much relevant information for this conversation that just actually really shocked me,
Mm,
because I started looking at, women founders in the creative space.
yes.
And I was shocked. And there's some different numbers, but that what I'm seeing is that 0.1% of creative agencies are founded by
Wow. That is amazing. That is, and not in a good way. Not in a good way. Yeah. Yeah.
not in a good way.
Yeah.
I can't believe that actually prior to having this conversation with you, I did not know that
Sure.
number.
Sure. Yeah. Now it's something you can't unknow, right? So yeah. Wow.
Because I'm thinking about some of the projects that myself and my team are working on this year, and how excited I am for the types of stories that we're going to be telling. And I was just looking, I was just kind of researching to see, hey, why it's so important that these companies are working with us, and me as a creative director,
Right.
um, specifically when we're talking about addressing some inequities and creating nonfiction stories around really demonstrating their impact. So when I started reading even more, like, hey, creative director statistics,
Mm,
that really, I think it's something, the numbers vary a little bit depending on
sure.
where you look, but somewhere between 11 and 12% of creative directors are women.
Wow. It's so low. Such a tremendously low percentage. Yeah. Gosh.
And then 0.25% of creative directors are Black women.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I literally, I'm fired up about it because I literally just
Yeah.
read this morning, and it's about so much more than representation,
Sure.
because this is about, we are communicators, we are creators, we are shaping messages for organizations. And if you think about 80-ish% of decisions when it comes to consumers are
Yep.
made
I was just
by
thinking that.
women,
Right. I
and
was just thinking that.
so few are actually shaping those messages. It makes sense why there may feel like a disconnect.
Sure. Sure. Have you seen a bias, Tamika, in some of what would have been clients potentially of yours that maybe didn't choose to go with TV media? Have you seen some of that bias?
Um, that's always hard to say.
Yeah. Or to measure, I guess, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, because ultimately we end up focusing on those who are fired up about working with us, and
They want to work with you. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
exactly. I'm always asking the question, if a partnership doesn't pan out that we think will, what the reason is. So I'm usually trying to collect that data.
Mhm.
But I do know that there are some organizations that we do work with that specifically seek us out
Well, that's
for
good. Yeah.
being minority owned or women
Right.
owned, because they're looking for certain types of messaging and communications,
Right.
and that's important that that's represented. And
Yes.
I think I'm always looking at my team too. And this is, even when I go through the interview process, I'm always asking, and making very clear we are collaborative.
Hmm.
Like, even if, like, we do quarterly brainstorming sessions with our whole team, and even if like a team member doesn't work on a certain client, we all come together and just brainstorm ideas,
Yeah.
because sometimes the best thing comes out of someone who like is not too close to a thing,
Mm.
right? Like, even if you work in finance, like, I want to hear your ideas
Right.
around this. Like, how does this land for you? How does this resonate for
Mm.
you? Because all of us, no matter who we are, even if we are like race, gender, like, put that aside, how we grew up, if we grew up poor, middle income, wealthy, like, all of those things
All
shape
impact.
how we
Yeah.
see the world.
Absolutely.
And messages and communications or advertising, however whatever that content is, land on us differently. We receive that differently. So it's so important to me that like I get as much different type of viewpoints and
Mm.
feedback on that as possible, that we have a diverse team to add to that.
It's interesting how you put that, Tamika, because a lot of times when I do ask this question of fellow women entrepreneurs, they so often come to the same point that you just came about, which is you're putting the onus back on yourself to go out and try to get all the perspective that you can. And I find that very interesting and also sometimes a little bit saddening and troubling that, as women entrepreneurs, you put it back on yourself to be as like open-minded and perspective as you can be when, you would think that you would expect the opposite. So I just think that just shows a tremendous amount of awareness in your community. And
Yeah.
it's something to be applauded because I don't see that in other communities as much.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
absolutely. No, thank you.
Do you have to lighten it up a little bit? Do you have a favorite project, or you don't need to name names clearly, but a favorite project or a favorite client that really, you're smiling now, so you must have one that really, really kind of was maybe a defining moment for TB media or just for you in general, Tamika?
Goodness.
Yeah.
There's so many, but I'm laughing and smiling because I know probably what my team would say.
They know
And
you
it's
well. Yeah.
I think it's for obvious reasons. We had a ton of fun. We had the opportunity to work with the University of the Virgin Islands.
Oh, wow. That's exciting.
And
Yeah.
several of us had the opportunity to travel there a couple
Mm.
of times, 2 years in a row, to work on this project. So I would say, I mean, we had a ton of fun creating the content because we were able to utilize this
This
beautiful
backdrop. Yeah. I mean, amazing. Yeah.
paradise,
Right.
which was a whole lot of fun. And it was also nice to be able to connect with a team that is mainly remote and
Mm.
work together in person, connect in person with the client, but also the team. And, when you're getting to spend, even though it was really hot, when you're getting to spend the day on the beach under palm trees and wrapping up the day with, a nice cocktail,
Right.
not a bad way
No, not a bad way to spend a work day. Yeah.
spend a work day. So I will say that was a really fun experience for our team, but there are so many.
Yeah, no, I can imagine, and especially when you guys have been, you've been at it for as long as you have been now, and I mentioned you've got dozens of clients, and that's very exciting. When you think about sort of, upcoming plans, exciting developments, within, yeah, what's kind of getting you really excited about either, we're early on in the year, what's getting you excited about this year, or maybe even further into the future, Tamika?
Yeah, there's a couple of things.
Yeah.
Actually, I'll be working on finalizing this afternoon. We're looking to hire our first full-time employee role.
Oh, wow.
So that is super exciting. So that's going to be coming, well, at the time of this recording, in the next week or
Yeah,
two.
sure.
um,
Soon, very soon.
yes. So that's exciting because, early in this conversation, I mentioned still the late nights, and I just think it
Yeah.
will really help because this person will also support in a creative role and storytelling as well. So
Mm.
just having another vision and person to bounce things off of, but also I think just being able to alleviate a lot of my load
Yeah,
as well.
yeah, and let you have a little bit more breathing room, I bet. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And and then we also have some new exciting opportunities for travel
Mm.
this year, where we'll really be producing some thought-provoking pieces. So
Ooh. I like
I
that.
am
I can't wait.
excited.
That's a good tease. You can tell you've got that journalistic training, right? To do that tease. Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Keep it locked right here.
Keep it locked on. Yeah. In the vein of the I wish I knew now what I wish I knew then what I know now, right? And some of the lessons learned, Tamika. and again, kind of not to put you on the spot to give advice, but if I was a 20 something female entrepreneur sitting here and I said to you, Tamika, like, what was the big mistake you made that you wish you could have a do-over on? Or, what do you wish you knew then that you know now? Anything particular come to mind there?
Yeah, a lot of
A
things,
lot
but
of things, right? Yeah.
I would say definitely trying not to do too much.
Mm,
Try to stay as focused as possible. I think, and I mean that because I think a lot of times we can get distracted with what seems like the quickest win. And
sure.
I think the balance that happens, right? Like everybody's got to eat, everybody's got to pay bills.
Sure.
But we all have a passion and we
Right.
all have that thing that really gets us excited that, you know, you could pay me $5 to do, and I'm going to jump out of bed and want to do it because you know what I mean? Because
Because I want to do it. Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
want to do it.
Yeah.
Like try to stay as close to that thing
Mm,
as you possibly can. Because if you just end up doing something else because it seems easy, it seems quick, it seems like it'll make you the most money, I think that's when you end up least happy.
mm. And if you're struggling in that regard, you're probably going to give up, right? You're probably going to say, I failed, but maybe they didn't fail as much as they kind of just lost their way a little bit. But it feels like
Exactly.
failure. Yeah.
Exactly. And I will say there were a lot of things because you know, I'm a fan of also trying things. And
Right.
that's what I'll say I feel like I did. I started the business knowing, hey, I love telling visual stories. I love video production. Like
Mm,
I always knew that was what I loved. But there was I needed to build it up. I needed to build the
sure.
experience. I didn't have enough of it. So I started trying doing different things.
Mm,
Um, and some of those things I liked, some of those things I liked a lot, some of those things I hated,
yeah.
but I wouldn't have known until I tried. But I will, you know, so it's kind of a balancing act. Like try it. If something interests you, try it, but
Mm.
also don't lose sight of what got you started of your
Oh, I like that. I like that one. That's a good one. Some good lessons here. Thank you. Anything else that you want to make sure anyone listening to this knows about your journey, your work, or just the power of storytelling? I think. Is there anything else that you want to make sure that folks hear from you about?
Um, never be afraid to tell your own story and feel
Mm,
like, hey, someone else has done this, has a similar story to me. They've heard this before. Your voice is unique. Your voice
mm,
is powerful. There is often there are often many people who need to hear your story and your message,
right.
but if there's only one that resonates with it and takes something away that you inspire, isn't that worthwhile?
That's the
So
power. Yeah.
that's the power of it. So
That's the power of it.
use your story because it somebody needs to hear it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, I think that would be my main message. And I will say that's one thing I've always gone back to when things have gotten hard is just going back to what makes me unique and sharing my story and finding that hey, people resonate with that because ultimately people love authenticity. They love
They do.
people by people,
Mhm.
right? So just if you're struggling to grow and navigate how to grow your business, just stay true to who you are and don't be afraid to show that to the world because whether a small company, big company, and everything in between, they're still connecting with another person.
And that's a very brave thing. If you can do that, you're being very brave, right? And I think ultimately you will be successful. Thank you, Tamika, for enlightening us with your story, telling us about, building your business amidst many, many things, and I really appreciate it. And thank you so much. And I'm very excited to watch TV media continue to grow in the next year and adding more employees and more clients, and good best of luck to you guys.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me and thank you for elevating the voices of women.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. We'll talk again soon.